Hello and welcome to this Unity lesson. In this lesson we're going to continue where we left off on the previous lesson. If you remember, you added an outpost building to your island scene, and then you set up some scripts so that the door to the outpost would open as you approached and then it would close as you walked away. In this lesson, we're going to modify your existing scene with some more functionality that will make it so that the outpost will be locked initially. You won't be able to enter it. And in order to enter the building, you'll need to collect 4 power cells that are laying around on the island. And by collecting those power cells, you'll unlock the door, and then you'll be able to enter in. In terms of Unity functionality, in this lesson we'll be looking at GUI textures. We'll be doing a bit more work with prefabs, and we'll do a bit more work with colliders, triggers, and scripting. So to show you what you're going to end up with at the end of the lesson, here's a quick example of what the scene will look like. So you'll notice as we're looking at the game that you've got GUI texture in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. This is our empty power cell, showing that I don't have any energy currently to unlock the door. If I walk up to the door, it won't open and you'll hear a locked sound. You'll notice next to the door there's a power generator there, and it's showing that there is no charge. So in order to gain charge, I have to go around and pick up these 4 power cells that are rotating around as pickup items. By running into them, I can pick them up, and my GUI texture on the screen will show that I'm collecting energy, as will the power generator will show that my charge is increasing. Once I've collected 4 of the power cells, I'll have full energy, the door will be unlocked, and I can enter. So that's where we'll end up. Now let's go back to the beginning and build up to this point. Okay, here we are back on our island scene with the version of the outpost building that lets us come in and out, but none of those other neat things have been added in, so let's go ahead and do that. First thing you're going to want to do on your own is make sure you've got your island scene open and you've got the version of it that you submitted for the last assignment so that everything is working in terms of entering and exiting that door. What you'll need to do next for this assignment is once again turn to your Book Assets folder in the project window and expand that out and go into the Models folder. And we're going to start off by making use of the power cell model. That's the one that looks like a little battery. What I'd like you to do is to select that power cell model and drag it out onto your scene view somewhere close to the outpost building. And remember, to zoom in on it, you can select that object in the hierarchy and then move your mouse out onto the scene view and hit the F key, and then you'll zoom right in on it. Now we need to make some modifications to this instance of that power cell object, the one that we've got out in the scene. And what we're going to do is we're going to set up the prototypical power cell object that we will then turn into a prefab for use in this scene. And creating a prefab allows us to quickly make duplicates of the object, and then we can modify instances of that object without making any changes to the original prefab. So let's go ahead and make those changes. So with the power cell selected in the hierarchy view, look over to the inspector, and we're going to change the scale of the power cell. If you come over to scale, let's change each of the X, Y, and Z elements of scale to 1.6. That's going to just make our power cell a bit bigger. And we need to be able to collide with the power cell, so we're going to add a collider object, component to the power cell. So with the power cell selected in the hierarchy, go to the menu to Component and Physics, and we're going to this time add a capsule collider because a capsule will roughly approximate the shape of that power cell. So we click on that, and you notice initially it looks like a big sphere, around the power cell. So we want to make a few changes to that capsule collider. So if you look over in the inspector, come down to the capsule collider section. First of all, we don't actually want to have the collider stop us as we run into the power cell. We want to be able to walk through it. So we're going to choose is trigger so that it'll pick up the collision of the first person controller, but it won't stop you. Then we need to change the radius of that capsule collider so it's not quite so big. We'll turn that to 0.3. And if you look out in the scene view, you'll see that the orientation of the capsule collider doesn't match the orientation of the power cell. To fix that, all we need to do is modify the direction variable under capsule collider so that it's going along the x-axis. And there we go. You'll now see that it matches the orientation of the power cell, and it's bigger than the power cell, so you don't have to go right on top of it to run into it. Finally, I might just move our power cell up off the ground a little bit there so that the collider is above the terrain. And the idea is that you want to set it up at a height where the first-person collider will be able to easily intersect with that power cell capsule collider. Finally, what we need to do is we're going to write some code that allows the collision with that power cell to be detected so that we know we've collected a power cell. And the code that we're going to write needs to access the tag associated with the power cell model in the scene. And right now you'll notice if you look in the inspector there is no tag associated with the power cell. So we're going to create one, and we're going to create one called cell. And I've already done that, but let me show you how to do that. So I can come over into the inspector to the tag drop down and select it. And then at the very bottom I can click on the add tag option. When I do that, I'll get the Tag Manager window in the inspector. And this can sometimes be confusing because when you open the Tag Manager, what you're going to see is all of these things that say User Layer. You can also name layers within Unity, but that's not what we're going to do at the moment. Instead, what we want to focus on is this tag item at the very beginning of the list. And so we want to expand that out. And if you go down to the bottommost element within the array of tags, this is where you can add a tag called cell. Now I've already done it, as you can see, but assuming on your project you don't have that, just type in the name of the tag that you want, in this case cell. Now that's only step one. We've created a tag called cell, but we still need to apply that tag to the power cell object in the scene. So I'm going to go to the hierarchy and click on the power cell object, go back over to the inspector to the tag drop down and choose cell. So now we have tagged our power cell model. The next thing we want to do with this power cell is we need to add a rigid body component to the power cell model in order for the script that we're going to attach to it to work properly. So with the power cell model selected in the hierarchy, go to Component on the menu item, go down to Physics, and choose Rigid Body. We don't actually want the rigid body to be having physics, having gravity. We don't need it for this scene to actually interact with the physics of the world. Therefore, what I'd like you to do is, once you've applied the rigid body over in the inspector, come down to the checkbox Use Gravity and deselect it, and then select the box that says Is Kinematic. Next, we need to create a script that's going to be attached to our power cell model. And it's a script that's going to do a couple of things. It's going to cause the power cell to be destroyed, to have it removed from the scene when we collide with it. And it's also then going to record the fact that we have interacted with it when we run into it, and it's going to cause it to rotate around, to spin around on the island in place. So let's go ahead and add that script now. If you go down to your project window and you choose Create JavaScript, and then rename the JavaScript script that's created PowerCell, and then double click to open that script inside MonoDevelop, and then paste in the code that is available for your use on the Blackboard site for the course under this Unity unit lesson into your PowerCell JavaScript. So briefly speaking, if you take a look at it, there's an update script. This is the script that tells that PowerCell model to rotate in place. And there's an onTriggerEnter script, which looks to see if the thing that's collided with the trigger is the player. And if so, it's going to send a message to that player object that calls the cell pickup function. And then finally, it's going to destroy the PowerCell object. It's going to remove it from the screen and from memory. So once you've entered in that code, you can save it and then return back to Unity. Once you're back inside Unity, you can attach that PowerCell script to the PowerCell model in your hierarchy just by dragging up and attaching it. And you'll see now in the inspector, there it is. It's got a public variable that sets the speed of rotation, and you don't need to mess with that. Now we have set up that PowerCell model exactly how we want it. It is now our prototypical PowerCell model for the scene. And given that we've got it set up just the way we want, it's time to convert that model into a prefab. And you remember from an earlier lesson, you can convert a model that you have on your hierarchy that's actually out in your scene. You can convert that into a prefab by simply dragging the object from the hierarchy to your project window. Now I've set up a prefab folder in my project window. You don't have to have that, but just to keep things organized. So I click and drag from the hierarchy and drop it down in the prefab folder, and now you'll see down in the project window that PowerCell has been converted into a prefab. Once I've got that set up as a prefab, I want to create multiple versions, multiple instances of this prefab out in my scene. And there are a couple ways to do that. One is you can click on the instance of the prefab that you already have in the scene, and you can choose to duplicate it, and that will just create another one that then you can move around. The nice thing about doing it that way is that one thing, it's quick. Another option is to take the PowerCell prefab from your project view and just drag it out onto the screen. Now you'll notice when I do that the y coordinate of the transform of that object doesn't match the other two. So one nice thing about doing the duplicate versus the dragging out onto the scene is that you can exactly match the Y location. So I'm going to delete that because I kind of like the duplicate version. It makes it a little neater. So I'll duplicate it a couple times so that I get 4 of them, and then I'll just move them around very close to my outpost building. At this point, you can test to see what it is you've done so far. So I'm going to save my scene, and I will give it a new name so that I can hold on to the scene that I had already, the one that was functioning with the door that would open and close, so just to have that as a backup. And I'll call this one, I've been playing with these PowerCells, so I'm going to call it PowerCell 2, and then I'll give it a test. So when I come up now to these PowerCells, you'll see there are rotating, and if I run into one, it disappeared from the scene. You'll notice that I get an error message at the bottom, send message cell pickup has no receiver. If you remember back to the script that we wrote, part of that script said that when we collide with the trigger around the power cell, it would check to see if the player was the thing that had collided with that trigger. And if so, it was going to send a message calling a function on the player object called cell pickup. Well, we haven't created that yet, thus we get the error message. But we did see that it is destroying the object in the world, which is good, so we can move on to our next step. The next thing we want to do is add the GUI texture that you saw in the example that will allow the player to know how many power cells have been collected. And here's how we're going to do that. Go to your project window and back one more time into the Book Assets folder, and then come down to Textures, and then go all the way down, and we're going to select the texture called HUD No Charge. Now you'll notice that with a lot of the textures inside the Book Assets folder, if you look at the inspector, the texture type for them defaults to texture. We want to change that for the texture no charge texture type to GUI. So again, select a HUD no charge texture in the project view, come over to the inspector, and then under texture type, select GUI. Once you've done that, we're going to add that GUI texture to the scene so that we can see it. And here's a quick way to do it. Make sure that you've got the HUD no charge texture selected in the project view. Then come up to Game Object, Create Other, and GUI Texture. And when you do that, you'll see it knew that I wanted to use the HUD no charge texture to create that GUI texture because I had selected it, and then it put it out right smack in the middle of the scene view, which is not really where we want it. So let's reposition that object into the bottom lower hand corner. And to do that, making sure that you've got HUD no charge selected in your hierarchy, go over to the transform, and let's make the X position, we're only dealing with the X and Y because we're now on a 2D plane of the screen. Let's make the X 0.3, and let's make the Y 0.1, and that will drop it down into that corner. I still think the X is a little too far out, so I'll do it 0.15. Now we're right up against the edge in this scene view, and in the game view, if I choose one of the aspect ratios, you'll see it sits nicely in the corner there, so that looks good. The other thing I'd like to do is change the name of this HUD no charge into something that makes a little bit more sense. So if you select the HUD no charge object, GUI object in your hierarchy, go over and change the name of it to Power GUI. Right, we've renamed that now. And we're going to add one more piece to the scene. You remember in the final version we looked at, we could see how many power cells we were collecting on the GUI texture in the corner, but we also were able to see as the charge was building in the generator. So let's add a generator object to the scene. I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, because I'd like to place that generator right next to the stairs here. Here's where you can find the model. Go back to the project view in Book Assets, expand out Models, and you'll see in there's an object called Texture. Just click and drag it out and stick it right next to your stairs by your outpost building. Now, one thing we want to do is we want to add a collider to this generator. Right now, if we hit play and were to walk up to that generator, we would be able to walk right through it because there is no collider associated with it. So let's go ahead and add that. Go over to your hierarchy view, come down to the generator object, and expand it out. And there are two child objects within the generator object. Select the one that is named the same thing, generator. And let's add a box collider to that child object. So go to Component, Physics, and Box Collider, and it will add it appropriately sized to the dimensions of that child object. So far so good. So now we've got the objects in there. Next, what we're going to need to do is create an inventory script. And this script is going to track how many power cells the player has collected, and then allow the player to open the door to the outpost after they've collected 4 of the power cells. So to do this, go back one more time to your project view, click on Create and JavaScript, and rename the script that's created, let's call it Inventory. And then you can double-click to open up that script in MonoDevelop. And once you open it up, you want to add in the code that is available on the Course Blackboard site for this Unity lesson. And I've already got it typed in here on my inventory JavaScript. To walk very briefly through this, what we're going to do is we're going to play a sound that the player hears when they collect one of the power cells. We're going to have a static variable that is the charge that we're going to increment as the player collects more power cells. Then we're going to have a couple of arrays that are going to hold textures that we want to display both on the GUI texture that's in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen as the player collects power cells, and that will display on the generator, same thing, as they collect power cells. So we need to let the script know which textures we want to use, which one are we going to rotate through as we collect those power cells. So that's what these HUD and generator array variables are for. And then down in the cell pickup function, this is where we're actually going to play the sound, where we're going to increment the charge variable, and when we will tell the GUI texture which texture to show, and where we'll tell that there's a texture applied to the generator object, and we'll tell it which one to show. So once you've got all that set up, you can return back into Unity. And I've got duplicates of my script, so I'm going to get rid of one there. And I want to now that I've created that script, I want to go ahead and add it onto the first-person controller object in the hierarchy. So let me go ahead and locate my script there. Here's my inventory script, and I'm going to just drag it up and drop it onto the first-person controller. And now if I take a look at it on the first-person controller, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see here's that inventory script, and it's looking for us to add some variables and some values to the script. So first of all, as I just mentioned, there's going to be a sound that plays when the player collects a power cell. So let's grab that from the projects window, the book assets folder, go down to the sounds and click on the cell collected and drag it over. And then, as I mentioned, we've got a couple of array variables in that inventory script, and we need to modify those array variables so that they will hold reference to the textures that we need to show. And here's how you can do that. First, look at the HUD charge array variable. Right now the size is zero. It's not holding anything. We're going to change that to 5. And when we do that, you'll see now it creates 5 slots inside that array variable where we can attach some textures. So to do that, go back again to your book assets folder in the project view and expand out the textures subfolder. Then come down to the section where we've got the HUD charges. And our default first element in the array is going to be that same HUD no charge, so we'll drag it to that slot. And then we're just going to work through 1 through 4 and drag those into the appropriate slots. Next, we need to let the script know what is the game object to which we're going to apply these textures as the player interacts with the power cells. So right now it's not listed as anything, and it's expecting a GUI texture. So no surprise, we're going to come up to our hierarchy view, and we're going to select that power GUI texture and drag it down and attach it to the script. Now we need to do something very similar to the generator object. So we're going to go to our meter charge array, make that have 5 elements. Come over to our textures folder within the book assets subfolder, and come down to the meter charge textures and just attach them in the order they're listed in the project view. So we go from 0 to 4. Oops, got them out of order there. Let's add that guy there. There we go. In a similar way, now we need to let the script know where is it we're attaching these textures. In this case, we're going to go to the hierarchy view to that generator object and expand it out. And we're going to grab the other child object in the generator object. And this is where we're going to attach, this is the item that we're going to attach to that script. So let's go back to our script that we were just working on the first-person controller. Come down to the bottom here where under the meter charge in the inventory script you see the item meter. Come up to the charge meter item in the generator object and drag that down and release. Now we've got our inventory script set up. We need to do a little bit more with the scripts in order for them to work properly when we test out the scene. And what we need to do is modify the onTriggerEnter function. This is the one that we wrote for the previous assignment. If you remember, in the previous assignment we had the onTriggerEnter script attached to the outpost building, and when the player walked up and collided with the trigger that we had in front of the door, it would just slide open the door. Well, we don't want it to slide open automatically this time. So instead, what we need to do is modify that script that we've already got, the trigger zone script, to add a bit of different functionality so that it will be locked when we need it to be locked. So I'm going to open up the trigger zone script, and you can see here's the one we used for the prior project. And I'm going to paste in some code into that. And this is also code that's available on the Blackboard site, and you can just go up and copy and paste it in. So looking at this briefly, what we've done is just added a few things. One is we want to have a sound when the player goes and tries to get into the door. Before it's unlocked, it'll make a little buzzing noise. And then in our onTriggerEnter function, we're going to check to make sure they've collected 4 of the power cells. And if so, then we're going to call a function on that door child object to open the door. And if not, then we're just going to play the locked sound that we're going to declare or define up here. So save that and come back into Unity. And that trigger script is already attached to your outpost building, but we need to let it know what sound to play. So if you click on the outpost object in your hierarchy, and now when you look down at the trigger zone script, you're going to see that it's now looking for a locked sound audio clip. So we need to give it that. Go to your project view, book assets, expand it out, open up the sounds subfolder, and find the door locked audio clip and drag that over and release it onto the script. With all of that done, let's save our scene and let's test it to see if it works, and if not, let's look at the errors and see if we can figure out what went wrong. So our GUI texture shows up on screen. If I go up to the door now, it's not going to let me in, and it plays a little buzzing noise. If I run up to PowerCell, it shows on my GUI texture, and it shows on the charge, but I still can't get in. So I'll quickly collect the rest of the power cells. I've got full power, the generator looks good, and I can now enter into my building. So that is it for this assignment. This is a shortened version of what is presented in the Unity 3.x book that we're using for class. In that chapter, there are a couple of additional steps that the author has done that are pretty cool, but I decided to leave them out of this assignment for the sake of your time. But if you'd like to, for the assignment, add on those final steps, it includes adding a light above the door that's red when the door is locked, and then once you've collected all of the energy cells, the light turns green to show that you can go in. And then also it adds a GUI text message that appears on the screen when you try to get into the door before it's been open. It will pop up in the middle of the screen with some hint text letting you know what it is you need to do in order to get in. So for your assignment, you don't need to add those two pieces, but you do need to do everything else you've seen. And as with previous assignments, once you have completed the assignment, please save it, publish it out as a web player version of the scene, and then upload both the Unity player and the accompanying HTML file. So good luck with this, have fun, and I'll see you later.